All right, guys. Just want to say, hey, welcome back after Christmas. It's great to be here. Uh, I probably messed up the start again tonight. There is apparently some lag in between that I'm still trying to get figured out, but we've got it all dialed in. I'll stop staring at the camera in just a minute and start talking. So just keep your eyes on board. But hey, it's great for you all to be here. It's great to be here with you all tonight. And sorry that I missed last night. Tuesday night live, we were out of town and trying to get back, and we're about an hour-ish away from home, and ended up with a flat tire on the side of the interstate. So great fun on a Tuesday afternoon. So got to change a tire in the rain and everything here in South Carolina, but made it home safe. Just not in time to be able to do our live tonight. So we pushed it out to Wednesday this week. But it's great to be here and great to have all of you guys here. I hope you had a wonderful Christmas and kept in mind what the reason for the season is. Kept it in perspective and in priority. I hope that everybody got to spend some time with your family, spend some time in the Word. Because the important thing is the older we get, and our younger generation, they don't recognize this yet, but the older we get, the more you realize excuse me, swallowed a frog, the more you realize the importance of being able to spend time with your loved ones, whether it's during the holidays or any other time. So that's something that I look forward to every year, is just the time with my family that I have, and getting to spend quality time with them without all the outside distractions of the world. So that was a great time. We really had an awesome Christmas. I got a lot of messages from you guys wishing me a Merry Christmas. I got to send a bunch of those back and reply to a bunch of you. If you sent me a message and wished me a Merry Christmas and I didn't get a chance to get back to you, I just want to say now, hope you had a Merry Christmas and many more to come. We've got a awesome conversation, an awesome topic to talk about tonight, something that I get a lot of questions about, and that is, what defensive handgun ammunition should I use for my pistol? And I've got a long answer to an even longer question for that tonight, so we're going to really dive into some details with different types of defensive ammunition, what to carry, and offer you some great suggestions. But for those of you, this is your first time here, I want to say, hey, welcome to you. And you can see on the bottom here, make sure you become a member of our Patreon Nation. We're going to be doing a live starting in January on our Patreon channel as well that will follow our live on YouTube. So for those of you that are interested in some extra content, we'll be able to jump in over there. And we also have a lot of videos on our Patreon channel that we're not able to publish on YouTube because of their rules and policies. We're getting ready to start our brand new reloading series on Patreon that will walk you through how to reload from someone that has zero experience other than knowing what the term reloading is. So if you know the term reloading, the definition of reloading, we are going to take it from the definition all the way through the entire process for handgun ammunition as well as rifle ammunition on single stage presses and progressive presses. So it's going to be a very in-depth and honestly a pretty long series because it's going to be a lot of information. We're going to break it down into probably 8 to 12 minute video segments so they're actually easy to watch and I don't bore you to tears, because let's be honest, it's for someone like me that can totally nerd out on something like that, it is a amazing topic, and I could sit down and watch information on it for hours and hours and hours on end. But for most people, about 8 to 12 minutes and, your eyes start to cross. It's like information overload. Oh my gosh, I cannot take any more of this. So we're going to keep the videos short, very sweet, very concise, to the point, and just bring all the information to you guys that we possibly can. And hopefully, if you don't reload, or if you do reload but you have questions about how to do it better, I've got almost 30 years of experience reloading at this point, and I started when I was just about 20 years old, and have got a lot of experience in reloading. Probably, if I had to guess, 1.5 million rounds or a little better, maybe pushing 2 million rounds that I've reloaded myself, both handgun and rifle. Some shotgun, not as versed in shotgun. I understand, and I've done a bunch of it to be able to. I could teach you guys how to reload shotgun, but shotgun, historically for me, has been about as cheap for me to go to the store and buy it as it has been to be able to reload it. So I've never been one to reload a whole lot of shotgun stuff unless I'm loading some one-off specialty cartridges. But so we're going to focus on the pistol and the rifle stuff with our reloading series, but just want to kind of give you a little heads up about that so you know what we have coming up. But let's jump into our topic for the night, which is going to be defensive handgun ammunition. What is it? How to choose it? What's going to work best for you? Because let's be real. What I may choose for my personal carry handgun ammunition may not necessarily be what you choose for your personal handgun ammunition based on where you live, your surroundings, places you go, where you carry. You may want a different type of ammunition. I change up ammunition in my pistols, my carry ammunition, depending on my situation, where I'm going to be. If I'm going to be out in public, I use a different ammunition than what I have in my pistols at home. And we're going to talk about that tonight. So going to jump in, answer a couple of questions right quick that some guys had posted in here earlier, and then we'll jump into our topic for the night. So Robert Picard says, I'm thinking about getting a 20-inch upper for my PSA AR to increase velocity. Is it worth it? It has a 16-inch on it now, and I'm going to put a LPVO, which is a low-power variable optic, on that one. I have another one with a 16-inch and a red dot. Robert, when I was in the Marine Corps, all of our rifles still had 20-inch barrels on our M16A2s. I'm a big fan of the 20-inch barrel. I think it does give you extended standoff capability that you don't have with the 14.5s or the 16-inch barrels. It does give you quite a bit more muzzle velocity, which also extends out to your 600, 700 yard ranges that you can reach out to with a 5.56 cartridge. So yes, I think adding a 20-inch barreled rifle to your collection is a great option. I would not have just one rifle with a 20-inch barrel. If I had one AR-15 and that's all that I had, it would either be a 14.5 or a 16-inch barreled rifle with a mid-length gas system. But if you're like most of us, AR-15s are like Doritos. You can't have just one. I would have a 20-inch option as well. Now, I think if you're a good alternative to that is the 18-inch barrel. I think the 18-inch barrel really gives you the best of both worlds. It gives you the added velocity, muzzle velocity that you get with a 20-inch barrel by being a couple inches shorter at 18, and also gives you a little more compact carryability that you get with a 16-inch model as well. But I've got a vast array of barrel lengths with my AR-15s, and adding a 20-inch is absolutely one that I would recommend if you're going to have multiple AR-15s. You should always have a 20-inch barreled rifle for extended range capabilities. And Robert Picard Jr. also says, how effective is the 5.7 on soft armor when launched from a pistol? I fear that reduction in velocity may negate its effectiveness. Robert, the 5.7 out of a 5-inch barreled pistol is still over 2,000 foot per second and will defeat the majority of your soft body armor that's on the market today. Being over 2,000 foot per second, you're still getting rifle type velocities out of it, and it will penetrate and will defeat your soft body armor. Let's see. Robert's from Raleigh, North Carolina. And Robert, it's great to have you on tonight. Mr. Rivers said, hope you had a great Christmas, to Mr. Picard, as well as to the other Robert or Robbie in the room. Rob, whatever you want to call me. But hey, Merry Christmas to all of you guys. Pappy Dan says hello from Pennsylvania. And let's see what else we've got here. DB from South Florida checking in. Mr. Landfill on board. Dwayne Booth from Anderson County, South Carolina, I'm assuming. Dwayne, it's great to have you here. Local guy on board tonight. Robert Picard says, I like Hornady Critical Defense. And I do too. And we'll get into that here shortly. GSD K9 from Cabrillas, North Carolina, says he enjoys our channel. I appreciate it, bud. Thanks for watching tonight. Gerald Montanana, greetings from Las Vegas, Nevada. Chase Kelly, hey Robbie, hope you had a Merry Christmas. Built an M16 slab side clone and it's awesome. I love building clone guns. Clone guns are probably one of my personal favorites. The Mark 12 Mod Zeros, you know, for those of us from that generation, the Mark 12 Mod Zeros, I think, they are an iconic firearm, almost like the M1As from the 60s and the 70s. You know, the guys that were in the military during that time, they loved the M1As. They loved what they were capable of and the upgrades and stuff you could do to them. Yeah, my generation, the Mark 12 Mod Zero, we kind of feel the same way about that one. It's an awesome platform. Robert Picard Jr. also have 4 DMRs. Yep. So you understand the benefit of the 18-inch barrel as well as the 20s. I'm not a fan of going longer than the 20. I think the 20 is really all you need for AR. You can go longer and get a little more out of it, but the 20-inch is really for me, I think, the maximum barrel length that I would do on a 5.56 cartridge. Gerald says, Robbie, have you had a chance to try out or look at the PSA STG-44? Thoughts? I do have a little bit of experience with it, but not enough to be able to give you a well-formulated opinion yet. The one that I did have a chance to play with functioned flawlessly. It ran great, had no issues with it at all. But with things like that, any kind of newer models that companies release, I always like to pick up an extra one, just an off-the-shelf model that's not necessarily been tweaked or tuned to be able to run 100% and see how off-the-shelf model that anyone that walked into a gun store and bought one would work. I am a big fan of the STG-44. I think it's an awesome platform. It was decades ahead of its time when it was designed, and it's still a great weapons platform today, especially when it's built in a modern caliber that's easy to get. So yes, I will be doing a review this year on the STG-44, so kind of keep an eye out for that. Corey Suttles from Oconee County here. Gene Graham from Lawrence, South Carolina. John G. from Spartanburg. Mark SD56. Hello from Commie, Massachusetts, where 10 rounds is our limit. We'll be praying for you out there, Mark. I hope you're able to move to a more free state. But as long as you're there, we'll keep you in our prayers, bud. And Chris Matthews says, I like HST and Hornady XTP, Critical Defense, Gold Dots. Robbie, what do you think of SIG's V-Crowns? We're going to get into that. And Chase Kelly says, had a M16A2 in boot camp, then an M14 on the ship. Kind of backwards to the Vietnam days from the M14 and then changed to the M16. Haha. I thoroughly enjoy both, actually. And Chase, you're right. They are both outstanding weapons platforms that have been stretched to the pinnacle of their ability with the manufacturing tolerances, the aftermarket support that we have today. Both are outstanding weapons platforms. So let's jump into our conversation of the night. Best defensive handgun ammunition. And first, let's kind of talk a little bit about what's available, what's out there as far as different types of ammunition, and then we'll break down each one of the projectile types that's available and talk about limitations and what works best, what each one of those projectiles and their applied application works best. So the first we have full metal jacket, then we have frangible ammunition, polymer tipped ammunition, pre-segmented ammunition, hollow points, and then with the hollow point design, there's a lot of different hollow point type designs that we're going to go into tonight. And then the last category is one that I added kind of toward the end, and that is the lightweight hollow point design ammunition that like Liberty ammunition makes, which is a interesting projectile. And so I'm going to talk quite a bit about that here in a little bit. Excuse me. But first, we'll start at the top. We'll start with full metal jacket ammunition, and this can be It's basically just a solid copper jacket on your ammunition with a soft lead core. You do get some, not necessarily expansion, but deformation with the projectile when you shoot it. And one of the benefits to full metal jacket ammunition is its ability to penetrate, because it doesn't expand a whole lot. It doesn't shed off a lot of energy as it's passing through soft body tissue. So that projectile generally will get a through and through pass. And what I mean by that is an entry hole and an exit wound. Me personally, I am in an ideal situation with a handgun. I'm a big fan of pass-through shots. You get an entrance wound, you get an exit wound. You have a person that's leaking from 2 holes instead of just 1. And generally 2 holes will bleed out faster than 1 hole will bleed out. That is in an ideal situation. The downside to full metal jacket ammunition is also the pass-through ability with it. You always have to worry about what is beyond what you're shooting. If you're in a defensive situation, you're having to use your handgun and you shoot someone, the round passes through them. What's on the backside of that person? What could that round impact if it does go through that person, or when it goes through that person? What's beyond your threat or your attacker? And that's a huge concern that we have with any of our full metal jacket ammunition, as well as some of the hollow point ammunition as well. Where that round's going to go after it leaves the muzzle of our pistol. So, full metal jacket ammunition it does have its place. It does work. It works well. One of the big things with handgun ammunition is handgun ammunition does not produce a huge temporary wound channel like you get with rifle ammunition. It doesn't have this huge ballooning effect as it passes through the body. It doesn't disrupt tissue. It doesn't push tissue out of the way. It doesn't disrupt organs with this temporary wound channel. If you shoot rifle ammunition into a ballistics gel block, you'll see the ballistics gel block swell up, and then it'll bounce back down. And then when you look through that block, there'll be a shape almost like this that goes through the block, and that big bell or bubble in the middle, that's your temporary wound cavity. That turns into a permanent wound cavity because it's disrupted the surrounding tissue enough to create a huge temporary wound channel or permanent wound channel inside the body once it passes through. Handgun ammunition does not have the muzzle velocity to create the huge temporary wound channels that you get with rifle ammunition. You don't get the cavitation with it. You don't get the expansion and the tissue disruption that you get with rifle ammunition out of a handgun, primarily due to muzzle velocity. You just don't have enough muzzle velocity to create that huge pressure wave which disrupts tissue. So how does handgun ammunition work for defensive situations? It works in a few different ways. One is shot placement, which should always be first and foremost in our mind. Shot placement is very, very critical with handgun ammunition. But for a one-shot stop with someone, which you generally do not see with handgun ammunition, a one-shot stop is going to be impacting someone in the T-box, and that's basically from the eyes to the bridge of the nose. It forms a T. That is a one-shot stop on a human being. Next is going to be the spinal column, clipping the spinal column and breaking the spine, which is a very narrow area, but that is a one-shot stop with someone. And then third is going to be your pelvic region, breaking the pelvic bone to where the person can't stand. If you can't stand, you can't walk, you can't fight. So those are your 3 areas for a one-shot stop. Heart shots generally are not one-shot stops. Single lung or double lung shots are not one-shot stops. Hits in the extremities are not going to be a one-shot stop. Gut shots are not going to be a one-shot stop. Now, all of these will cause a person to expire eventually, but it's not going to immediately take them out of the fight with a handgun. And that's why most of your defensive situations with a handgun, you see the threat being engaged multiple times, being shot with multiple rounds before the threat is stopped. The threat stopped from attacking. And the reason for that is most of your handguns do not have enough energy to stop a threat with just one round. And we're talking about a sane, sober person in this conversation. We're not talking about someone that has maybe some type of mental disorder or someone that is high on some type of narcotics. Those completely alter how a person reacts to a gunshot. So, and that's always something that we have to take into account, is if I'm in a defensive situation, is the person high? And just know and realize going into that situation that one round from your handgun is not going to be like what you see in the movies. You shoot somebody once, and 9 times out of 10, it's not going to stop the threat. They're going to continue coming, especially if they're high or if they have some sort of mental disorder. The one shot is generally not going to stop them. They're going to continue attacking. And that's why we have to use multiple rounds out of our handguns to stop most threats. Now, before I dive too deep into that, let's move on to some different types of ammunition. Next on my list is frangible ammunition. Now, frangible ammunition, I am a big fan of, especially for defensive ammunition in your firearm. Frangible ammunition, you get great penetration with it, but generally your frangible ammunition will shatter on hard objects such as walls, cars, things like that. So you can reduce your overpenetration potential with a lot of your frangible ammunition that's out there. Frangible ammunition works very well for its intended purpose and is definitely one of the rounds that I would consider or advise you to look into further to add to your arsenal as far as ammunition that you carry in your defensive firearm. Next is going to be one of the newer ones on the market. I say newer, it's been around for a decade or decade and a half now, and that's your polymer tipped hollow point ammunition. And this is one that is probably one of my personal favorites. A lot of you guys have already commented in the sides over here with Hornady Critical Defense, Hornady Critical Duty. And one of the benefit of the polymer tip is the polymer tip basically plugs up the hollow point on the ammunition, and it does a couple of things. One, it gives the shape more of a full metal jacket projectile, which tends to feed very well in the majority of your handguns that you have. So your polymer tipped ammunition is going to feed very similar to ball ammunition, which means that if your gun's going to feed it, generally your polymer tipped ammunition is going to work in the firearm. If it'll feed ball, it'll generally feed the polymer tipped ammunition. The second big benefit, and from a defensive situation, this is where polymer tipped ammunition really shines. The polymer plug fills in the hollow point cavity in the ammunition, and what that does is it allows that projectile to penetrate clothing. So this time of year, wintertime, everybody's wearing multiple layers. We've got big, thick jackets on and stuff. That polymer tipped ammunition will penetrate your jacket, whatever clothing that someone has. It will eventually shove that polymer tip back into the projectile, and the projectile will expand like it's supposed to. And you'll go from say a 9mm measure is 0.355 in diameter as a brand new projectile. It will expand to 600, 650, 700 thousandths of an inch in diameter when you get to the outer petals, which gives you great expansion. It helps to reduce overpenetration and allows that projectile to expend 100% of its energy inside the thread, which is what we're looking for. We want to get the FBI measurements that they use for ammunition is they want penetration results from 12 to 18 inches. And so that's generally what we're looking for with our ammunition. We want that ammunition to penetrate between 12 inches and 18 inches and expend all of its energy while doing so. If the projectile does happen to exit, the majority of its energy has already been expended as it was passing through the threat, as it was expanding, And then that projectile, even if it does still continue to travel downrange, it is at an extremely low velocity, and the odds of that projectile causing serious bodily injury or death to a bystander is very, very limited. Now, that polymer tip doing its job, pushing back into the projectile, allowing that projectile to penetrate through the clothing and then still expand properly, that is what makes that projectile so effective over the vast majority of your other hollow point ammunition that's on the market. And we're going to get into some of that in a minute. Next on the list is pre-segmented hollow point ammunition. What this is a hollow point round that has scoring marks cut on the sides of the projectiles, and that allows the projectile to expand into, it allows that projectile to expand into multiple fingers, and then in some cases it even allows those fingers to expand and separate, creating multiple wound channels inside the threat as that bullet passes through. There's several different brands of ammunition that are out there right now. You can look them up online. They look almost like a talon. They're crazy looking, with these fingers that come up and these scored segmented lines all around them. But they are an extremely effective projectile at creating multiple wound channels throughout a threat as you shoot them. So, and the pre-segmented one is definitely one that I would consider as well, with one caveat: if your firearm will feed them reliably. That's one of the big things, and that goes without saying with any of this ammunition. It could be the be-all end-all best defensive ammunition ever made, right? 100 times better than anything else that's out there. But if that ammunition will not feed in your firearm, it is absolutely worthless. It has to feed in your firearm that you carry 100% of the time, be 100% reliable for you to be able to carry that ammunition. Because when you need it to go bang, it has to go bang. You know, the whole thing, if it can go wrong, it will, definitely applies to defensive handgun ammunition. So whatever you decide that you're going to carry, buy a box of it, run a box of it through your pistol. Make sure your pistol will feed it reliably from the first round to the last round. If you have one failure, that ammunition goes to the side. You don't use it in your defensive firearm. You try it in a different gun. But make sure that whatever you're using will feed in your firearm. And our next, and I guess kind of our last category, is going to be hollow point ammunition. And hollow point ammunition is one of those that is a great round. It's been around for decades. It works exceptionally well. We can carry it as civilians in our firearms. Most of your law enforcement carry it in their firearms. Military is not allowed to carry it in their firearms because it violates the Geneva Convention. Military has to use full metal jacket or open tip match ammunition. And I won't go into open tip match ammunition on here tonight because that's a completely different topic and discussion. So we'll just leave that out, other than to say it is a end around. Okay. Well, hollow point ammunition. Let's talk about hollow point ammunition a little bit. Most of it does exactly what it's designed to do. It has a hollow cavity. That hollow cavity allows fluid to get inside it, which forces that projectile to expand to a certain diameter based on the depth of the hollow point, based on some pre-segmented cuts that you can do on the copper jacket, and that projectile will expand properly as it's passing through a threat. 9mm, you're going to get anywhere from at a 355 diameter projectile will expand a 400, 500, 600, 700 thousandths of an inch, depending on how the projectile is machined and how it's formed. The depth of the hollow point plays a big part in that, as well as the segmented lines that are cut on the sides of it. Now, one thing with hollow point ammunition that is a big negative as far as I'm concerned, that really makes the polymer tipped ammunition shine above your standard hollow point ammunition, is the fact that this time of year, once again, we're wearing thick clothing. Thick clothing, multiple layers of clothing, as a hollow point round passes through, it can pack, that hollow point cavity can pack full of all of the fabric that it passes through before it ever reaches the threat. Now, if you pack that tip full of fabric before it ever reaches the threat, at that point you essentially have a full metal jacket projectile that will not expand correctly or properly or at all because it's got all that fabric packed into it, and it basically creates a round nose or full metal jacket projectile. Now, there's a lot of your projectiles now that are pre-segmented that have some scoring marks and stuff cut on them to help facilitate expansion, even if they get packed up with fabric. But that's one thing to be aware of and to be in consideration of when you're buying your ammunition is, it's wintertime, especially if you're in a really cold climate, cold environment where people are wearing multiple layers of clothing. If I go with a hollow point that has a big tip on it, is that tip going to get stuffed full of fabric as it passes through clothing before it ever reaches the threat, and will it expand properly? So do some research on that before you buy a particular brand of hollow point ammunition that doesn't have a polymer tip in it, to make sure that there are expansion tests done on that ammunition with multiple layers of clothing in front of it to make sure that that projectile does expand like it's supposed to. Now, let's dip into hollow points a little bit further. We're going to talk about some hollow point design. So, I'm sure you guys have been in the gun stores, and there's shelves and shelves and shelves of defensive ammunition. All of it, or the vast majority of it, is some type of hollow point. And those hollow points all have different shapes to them. Some of them look like they've just got a little small hole in the top, to some that are basically the entire top of the projectile is a big hollow cavity. I've always referred to them as a flying ashtray, especially in 45 ACP. The ones with a giant cavity in the front, they almost look like an ashtray. They're so big, it's almost comical. They do expand very well. That's one of the benefits to that big cavity, is it allows a lot of fluid into it, which helps that projectile to expand very fast over a very small hollow point, which is going to expand at a slower rate. And there's different types of hollow points. You've got hollow points that are shallow as far as the depth of the hollow point. You have hollow points that are very deep. And basically what you're looking at there with the depth of the hollow point, the bottom of where the hollow point ends is where the expansion is going to stop. So if you have a projectile with a very shallow hollow point, that very shallow hollow point is only going to expand until it reaches the bottom of that hollow point. Once the expansion reaches the bottom of the hollow point, the hole in the projectile, the expansion is going to stop. The deeper the hole in the projectile, the more expansion you're going to get. And then at the bottom of the hollow point, there's different shapes as well. They're flat bottomed. There's some that have a V bottom, and then there's some that have a post in it. And each of those configurations are designed to create a specific type of expansion and expansion rate with that projectile. The companies will use the flat bottom if they're wanting to get a shallow flat bottom if they're wanting to get less expansion and more penetration. Companies will use a deeper hollow point with a V bottom if they're wanting to get more expansion and less penetration. So they're using the hollow point cavity itself to control the amount of expansion that you get on the projectile, as well as the depth of penetration that projectile will achieve at a given velocity out of a particular handgun. So those are all things that you have to look at, and that's one of those where doing your research on the projectile really comes into play. You need to do your research on what muzzle velocity is, what the barrel length of the test handgun was that they were using to be able to for their ballistics testing. So if you've got a subcompact 2.5-inch barreled pistol and they did all of their testing out of a 5-inch barreled pistol, the results that you get are going to be different than the results that are published. So always look at the barrel length that was used for the testing and try and mirror that barrel length or that velocity with your particular firearm if you're wanting to get similar results to what the test results were giving. Look at the expansion with the projectile. What kind of expansion are you looking at? Are you wanting to get 12 inches plus? Are you wanting less than 12 inches? Are you wanting 24 inches plus? Those are all questions that you have to look at when you're deciding on your defensive ammunition. And all of those questions, excuse me, all of those questions should be able to be answered with a little bit of research on that projectile online. There's a lot of people that have done independent testing on defensive handgun ammunition, with ballistics testing, and have posted their results on YouTube. So if there's a particular cartridge or projectile that you're looking for your defensive carry firearm, I'll almost guarantee you that there's already results posted on YouTube, both by the manufacturer as well as external companies that do ballistics testing as well. So look that up before you ever decide to purchase any type of defensive ammunition, and make sure that it works and aligns with your goals. Just looking at my notes over here. Excuse me, guys. You have to excuse me tonight. I've had been a little under the weather the last few days. I had a really fun weekend with a bunch of sinus mess that everybody in our house has had going on. It's been pretty enjoyable. GSD K9 says, attorney will have a field day with you if you use RIP ammunition, or back a few years ago when they had zombie ammo. RIP ammunition is one that I was referring to earlier. Boris says that ammunition is still made. Yes, that ammunition is still made. There's a company in Georgia that actually loads that ammunition, and it's a very interesting projectile. It does what it's supposed to do as a defensive round. It's got these little fingers on it that essentially expand, and instead of creating a hollow point where it mushrooms out as it expands, each of those little fingers break off and create a separate individual wound channel, and then you still have the solid base, which is probably half of the projectile weight, that will continue passing through almost like a full metal jacket round would. So you get multiple wound channels with the RIP ammunition. One of the downsides that I've seen to it is it does not feed well in a lot of handguns. So it's one that if you do decide to carry, make sure that you test it in your firearm and that it does work properly. As far as an attorney having a field day with that, if you're involved in a defensive shooting and it is a warranted defensive shooting, basically it's what's called a good shoot. It's very clear, it's very justified that you use that firearm in protection of your life or the life of someone else. There's not an attorney in the world that's going to have a leg to stand on. It doesn't matter what kind of ammunition, what kind of handgun, or what kind of trigger pull weight you had in that firearm. Now, if it's what's called a bad shoot or a questionable shooting, yes, you could potentially run into some issues based on the type of ammunition that you were using and a lot of other factors. But that's a whole nother topic right there, and so we'll say that's good, and that's all with that, and we'll move back to just focusing on the ammunition side of it itself tonight. So, and then our last category that I was talking about is the lightweight hollow point ammunition that's available right now. There's Liberty's making a hollow point round that for a 9mm pistol only weighs about 50 grains and is achieving velocities of 2,000 plus foot per second out of a 5-inch barrel pistol. Now, these are rifle type velocities that you're going to be able to achieve with these projectiles. They're in the 2,000 plus foot per second range, which means that projectile is going to hit very hard. It's going to expand. You're going to actually create a temporary wound channel. Now, one of the downsides that I've seen to this ammunition is it goes back to Newton's law of relativity. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. that very lightweight projectile does not produce a whole lot of back pressure. So those rounds, they function really well in, say, like a 1911 with a light recoil spring in it, but they can be very unreliable in like a Glock that has a 15 or a 17 pound recoil spring in them. It just doesn't have enough energy to be able to cycle the slide and chamber the next round reliably. And I've tested those rounds in Glock 19s, Glock 17s, Glock 22s, and 34s in 9mm and 40 caliber, and I had reliability issues in all of the Glocks with the Liberty ammunition. Now, when I ran it in my 1911s with a lighter weight recoil spring, it was absolutely flawless in it. And it does run exceptionally well. The ballistics test with this ammunition is exceptional. So if you have a firearm that lightweight ammunition will work in, and you're looking for something that has the most muzzle velocity that you can possibly get, the Liberty ammunition is a great choice. Now, let's talk a little bit about projectile construction, as far as your hollow point projectiles that you can get off the shelf or that you can get to reload yourself. There's a few different types of projectiles that are out there. There are your solid lead projectiles, which for 40 caliber and 45 ACP, no issue at all with using a solid lead projectile in those. 9mm, I don't really recommend it because those projectiles are generally supersonic, and no matter how hard the lead is, you're going to end up getting some leading inside your barrel. So I tend to stay away from solid lead projectiles for anything that's over about 1,000 foot per second, and I'll go with a plated or a jacketed projectile at that point if I'm exceeding 1,000 foot per second. But the solid lead projectiles do perform very well. A lot of guys, myself included, if I'm in bear country, I'm carrying a hard cast lead bullet in my 10mm because it penetrates exceptionally well. So if penetration is what you're looking for, some of the hard cast stuff for defensive use or bear country, the hard cast stuff works very well. But when you get into your higher velocities over 1,000 foot per second, you're going to get some leading in your barrel with a projectile that is a hollow point design that is designed to expand for human type defensive situations. Next is going to be plated projectiles, and a plated projectile is just what it says. It is a soft lead core that they electroplate with generally copper or a copper brass combination to give you a thin skin on the outside of the lead, which helps to prevent leading in the bore, and it works very well in that regard. They generally expand pretty well. The only downside to them is most companies use a very soft lead, which gets a lot of over expansion and reduces your penetration as far as using it in a defensive situation. Generally, plated bullets are not going to be one of my top choices. Generally, my top choice is going to be your lead core copper jacketed projectiles. Those are what you generally see if you're looking at like Spear Gold Dots or any of the vast majority of your commercially available hollow points that are out there today are going to be that type of core. It's going to be a copper jacket over a lead core that will either be swedged in place or poured in place, depending on their manufacturing process and what their end goal is with how they get that projectile to expand. But those are your 80% of your ammunition, maybe even 90% of your ammunition when you go into a gun shop and are looking at defensive ammunition. That's what you're looking at, is a copper jacket lead core hollow point with different types of hollow point designs for different expansion rates. And then our last is going to be our solid coppers. Now, the solid coppers are generally not going to be quite as heavy as your lead projectiles because the copper doesn't weigh as much as lead. So same size projectile is going to be a little lighter weight as far as the copper goes. But the coppers, they get a very consistent, reliable expansion rate, and you're able to do a lot more with the projectile itself. Most of your copper projectiles are going to be a machined projectile and not necessarily a poured projectile or a stamped, pressed projectile like you would see with your lead core copper jacket projectiles. They work exceptionally well. Downside to them is they're expensive. Their copper is going to be more expensive than the lead, so the copper ammunition is going to cost you quite a bit more. But they do work very well. Once again, do some research on it before you buy it, and make sure that those projectiles meet your needs as far as penetration, expansion, and feed reliably in your firearm. All right, I think that's covered about the majority of my topics that I wanted to cover tonight on defensive ammunition. So guys, if you have any questions on that, pop them in the side over here, and I'll answer some of your questions on defensive ammunition for your handgun. And while you're putting questions in, I'm going to kind of read through here, and we'll answer some of the stuff that's on the side that I haven't got to yet. Scroll back up a little bit, get caught up some. GSD K9 says, don't go crazy with defensive ammunition, go with something very standard, or they will tear you a new one in court. They will even go after you if you use hollow points. I've testified in several murder trials as an expert witness in firearms and ballistics, and that's never been anything that was a topic that was brought up that was really delved into. Not here in South Carolina anyway. I'm sure that different judges have different things that they want to hear. Different defense attorneys and different prosecutors have different things that they want to bring up, and I think it's really something like that would really depend on the prosecutor in the case and how well versed he is in defensive shootings, as far as how far down that rabbit hole that he would want to go. GSD K9 says, I use Ranger XT law enforcement. It's a great round. The Winchester Rangers, for those of you that don't know, Winchester used to have a round called the Black Talons. The Black Talon is the Winchester Ranger XT ammunition without the black coating on it. That's all that it is. It's a great round. It's been around for a long time and is a proven performer. God and Gun says, ask the FBI agents in Miami about the two bank robbers who were high on drugs, how many times they shot them. And you're exactly right. I see this all the time. I research a lot of different defensive shooting situations as well as law enforcement shooting situations, and look at the state of mind that the person was in, whether they were on drugs or not, what type of drugs that they were on, and how many rounds it took to finally stop that threat. And it's very, very seldom that you ever see someone shot with a handgun that stops the threat in just 1 or 2 rounds. It generally takes multiple rounds. And guys, listen, one of the things to remember is just because we're the good guys and have body armor doesn't mean that the bad guys don't have body armor. That's something that we have to be aware of now. Body armor, it goes both ways. It's for the good guys as well as the bad guys. I mean, we can all get our hands on it. We can all use it. And you have to be aware of, if you're in a defensive shooting situation and you're shooting someone and they're not stopping and you're starting to run low on ammo, they may be wearing body armor, and it may be time to switch where you're shooting that person. Most of your body armor covers from chest to waist. And if you're wearing soft, which most people do, most people don't wear hard plates. They're going to wear some kind of soft armor, but that covers your vitals in your chest area. If you're shooting someone and they're not stopping, take into consideration they may be wearing body armor, and either aim high or aim low for the pelvis. The pelvis is a great area to shoot someone to stop them. You've got the femoral arteries that run through the pelvis. You have the pelvis bones, which support the legs. The pelvis is one of those areas that a lot of people tend to overlook in a defensive situation. They're focused on the threat, their head, their hands, their arms, generally not your front sight where you should be looking. But you're focusing on the wrong things instead of slowing the situation down, which is hard to do when you're in a defensive situation with that adrenaline dump. You have to force yourself to slow things down and be able to see what you need to see to be able to stop the threat. And that's your front sight, your accuracy, where the rounds are going, where the rounds are impacting, how the person's reacting to those rounds impacting them. And if they're not reacting favorably, change up your point of impact, change up where you're shooting. So just a little tip there. Got John Richardson from the great state of Maine checking in late. John, good to have you tonight. Bill Wunkel says, pros and cons between the CZP-07 and the P10C. And do you prefer one over the other? Also, any thoughts on the Underwood Extreme Defender ammunition? All right, Bill, we'll kind of work our way down through this a little bit. I prefer, personally, the P10C over the P07. I think the P10C is a more accurate pistol. I think the ergonomics are better on the P10C. The trigger is much better on the P10C over the P07. If I had to pick one or the other for a carry gun, I would take the P10C 10 out of 10 over the P07. Personal opinion, I know there's guys out there that have the P07s that absolutely love the P07, and it's nothing wrong with it. It's not a bad pistol. They shoot well, they're accurate enough, but I personally prefer the P10C over the P07 for the reasons I listed, especially the trigger. The P10C trigger is night and day better than the P07 trigger. And then any thoughts on the Underwood Extreme Defender ammunition? The Underwood makes a very, very good line of ammunition. I have never done any ballistics test with the Extreme Defender, so I'm not sure how it performs in ballistics test as far as expansion and penetration. So that's one that I would recommend looking up some reviews on that on YouTube and see some guys that have done some ballistics testing with that and what kind of penetration and expansion results they were getting out of it, as well as the barrel length of the pistol that they were using and the muzzle velocity that they were getting out of that particular barrel length before you make your decision on it. Handgun says, used to have both. I still have the P07 and love it. Yeah, the P07's a great gun. Absolutely a great gun. GSD K9, so I think we've already read that one earlier. Pittsburgh City of Champions 79 says, hi, Robbie. Hey, bud. How you doing? Good to have you tonight. And yeah, there's a couple of people in here talking about the RIP ammunition, and yes, it is still available. Guns talked about the Liberty ammunition a little bit earlier in the show. I do like the Liberty ammunition. There's a lot that I do like about it. I like the muzzle velocity that you get out of it. I like the temporary wound channel that it creates. I like the penetration, the expansion. The only thing that I found with it that brings me pause with it is the fact that it is very handgun specific. Like, it doesn't work in my Glocks at all reliably. It doesn't work in my 17s, my 19s, 22s, 23s, or my 34. I get stovepipe issues with it, failure to feed, failure to eject, and then double feeds, just because it is a very lightweight projectile and doesn't produce enough back pressure to reliably cycle the slide on my Glocks. It runs absolutely phenomenal in my 2011s and my 1911s. And if I'm carrying a 1911, a lot of times that's the ammunition that I have in it. It works very well. Nanny D61 says, I may not say this correctly, but can you replace the magazine release on an AR? Yes, you can absolutely replace the magazine release on an AR. There's a lot of companies out there that make a lot of different options. There's extended right side magazine releases. There's ambidextrous magazine releases that allow you to release the magazine from both the right side and the left side of the receiver. But yeah, lots of options out there. It's just a screw-in part. So you depress the magazine release on the button as far as you can, out the left side of the receiver, unscrew the magazine release lever, take the two parts and the spring out, put your new lever in, screw everything back together, and you're done. It's pretty simple and easy swap over with that. But yeah, lots of options out there as far as magazine releases for the ARs. Chris Matthews says, for revolvers, I hear wad cutters are very good for snub nose that won't expand. That's exactly right. And it depends too on the Burnell hardness of the lead for the wad cutter itself. If you've got a really soft Burnell hardness wad cutter, it's going to expand or splat, for lack of a better term. It's going to hit and it's just going to flatten out. Where your harder wad cutters will just cut a perfectly round hole with a very sharp edge and exit the exact same way. Some of your wad cutters can tumble as they're passing through soft tissue or ballistics gel. But yeah, wad cutters work, and they work well. Gerald Montanona says, any progress on getting that Stealth Arms 2011 Platypus to test? No, Gerald, not yet. It will be sometime after SHOT Show before I'm able to get anything like that. Normally, that stuff that is available for T&E purposes generally goes to SHOT Show in January, and it's after SHOT, normally 1st of February and beyond, before we're able to get any of the T&E samples from pistols like that from different companies. Peppy Dan says, wow, I really learned a lot. That was so helpful. Peppy, appreciate you watching tonight. I'm glad that I could share a little bit of this useless knowledge that's floating around inside of my head with you guys. Handgun says, this is an old wise tale. If a lawyer is going after you because I want to charge you for murder, it doesn't matter what you use. And you're exactly right. And that's been the thing that I've seen in court cases as well. You know, the trigger pull on your pistol is one that I've heard for decades and decades. Well, you don't want to carry that pistol with that light trigger pull because if you have to use it in a defensive situation, they're going to use it against you in court. I've never experienced that. Same thing with different types of ammunition, different hollow point brands of ammunition. That's been something that I've heard about for years and years and years, decades, but it's not something that I've ever seen or experienced in a court case that was ever brought up. You know, why did you use this brand of hollow point or that brand of hollow point? I just haven't seen it. Now, you know, I'm in a very conservative state, and in our state, we have very strong handgun defensive laws. We have very strong stand your ground laws, and so, you know, those things may be different in maybe more liberal states and other states. I don't have any experience testifying as an expert witness in more liberal states, so I can't speak to the validity of that in more liberal states. Robert Picard says, I know a few drug dealers that wear level 3. Robert, why do you know a few drug dealers? Just kidding, bud. Boris says, I like my 10 millimeter Underwood 200 grain. It's good for level 3 in theory. Boris, I can tell you that it is good for level 3. In fact, it will not fully penetrate level 3, but it will shove level 3 body armor 4 to 5 inches into ballistics gel, and there'll be a 1.5 inch to 2 inch round cone of Kevlar with a projectile in the end of it that shove 4 to almost 6 inches into ballistics gel. It is gory impressive to see the effectiveness of 10 millimeter in ballistics testing. And our last question of the night from Nanny D61. This is the first live stream I've stumbled onto. Do you have a regular day and time for a live stream? I've really enjoyed this and learned a lot. Nanny D61, yes, we normally do our live on Tuesday nights from 6 p.m. On. And that's Eastern Standard Time, but it's normally Tuesdays from 6 o'clock on Eastern. And tonight we had to switch it up a little bit tonight because we were out of town last night and I didn't get back in time for our normal live. But yeah, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard every Tuesday you can catch us on here. And that's about all for tonight, guys. Thank you all for stopping by and sharing your evening with me, talking about a really good topic that, you know, I feel like a lot of people had questions and needed some answers and a little information about as far as the best defensive ammunition and what to look for in defensive ammunition for your handgun. We'll be back on here again next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern. And, make sure you check out our Patreon page. We will be doing a live starting in January on our Patreon as well for all of our members. And we'll be going into a lot more topics over there on that. everybody, thanks for watching tonight. I enjoyed it.